Employee health and wellbeing is the single biggest HR priority for best workplaces. And in fact, it should be the single biggest priority for employers, particularly so in the last 2 years with the pandemic and the issues around employee health and wellbeing that has caused. It should really be high up on your agenda. This particular statement was taken from Great Places to Work, who recently carried out extensive research, and they surveyed a number of businesses across the UK, both large and small, and realised that health and wellbeing absolutely needs to be every business's priority, particularly for this year. Challenges do continue. So we hope that this session will give you some further insight into some of the considerations that fall under the employee wellbeing umbrella, and there are a lot, and there are some that you may not have even thought about before. So hopefully this will give you a bit of insight and a bit of food for thought in terms of how you as an employer can go away and sort of further improve, shape and develop some of your wellbeing strategies. So in terms of session objectives today, we're just going to cover off what is employee wellbeing. Actually, what does it cover? What are the elements there? We'll be looking at what affects employee wellbeing as well. The business case for wellbeing in the workplace. Why should we take this as a priority? Why should we take it so seriously? We're also going to be looking at wellbeing across the generations in the workplace. And we're going to finish with a bit of a summary of considerations for you in terms of next steps, things that you can take away and do some further thinking about. So first off, just a question really. When you think about employee wellbeing, what is the first thing that comes to mind for you? And if you could type your responses into the chat box and we'll have a look at those, that'd be really helpful. I think the first thing that springs to mind, and I think there is definitely a theme there in terms of your responses, is around mental health and also physical health. And I think, sometimes employers see physical and mental health as the extent of well-being really, but actually there's so much more. And as I said, we will come on to that in a bit more detail. Mental health has obviously been really, really significant the last 2 years with the pandemic. So it's not surprising that a lot of people immediately think mental health when they're thinking about wellbeing in the workplace. And I know that many employers have put in place real significant investment in supporting employee mental health. And that's been as a direct result of the pandemic. And it has caused a lot of issues for employers. It's caused a lot of time away from work. So it absolutely, mental health should be on your wellbeing agenda. But you'll see as we go through the presentation that there are a few other considerations as well that extend beyond mental and physical health. So the state of employees' mental and physical health resulting from dynamics within and sometimes outside of the workplace. So this is a definition that I've pulled, which just gives I suppose in its most basic form, it gives a definition of what we mean when we talk about employee wellbeing. And I think the word dynamics is interesting because I think this also suggests that there are other factors that come into play when you think about employee wellbeing, and they could be situations, they could be relationships, but they could also be the environment of the person, and that can extend outside of the workplace. So it might be that the wellbeing considerations are not as a direct effect of what's happening inside the workplace, but it could be that things are going on in their home life which doesn't just stop at the office door, that is brought into the workplace. And I think there is a certain responsibility for employers to understand that and really help support their employees with their wellbeing initiatives. So some of these might surprise you. Some of these you may not have necessarily thought about in great detail in terms of coming under the wellbeing umbrella. But there are actually 8 dimensions of wellbeing in the workplace. Physical and emotional health, I don't think we need any more real explanation about that. We are all aware of the physical and mental wellbeing aspects. You know, things like making sure that you've got the right health and safety policy and practices in place, that you're carrying out risk assessments so that you're not harming or impacting your employees' physical health. Mental health, so the emotional side of things, is just making sure that you've got strategies in place, such as good occupational health support. You may have an employee assistance program. You may offer sort of counselling support and that type of thing to cover off the emotional side of wellbeing. One of the things that's quite interesting and I think often gets overlooked is financial wellbeing, actually. And a recent research report conducted by the CIPD says that 1 in 4 employees report that money worries have actually directly affected their ability to do their job. So it is having an effect on their performance. However, only 49% of employees surveyed offer any financial wellbeing provision to their employees. So people are experiencing financial difficulties, and this is only going to increase. So we saw some of the impacts, the financial impacts through the pandemic. You know, what have we got coming down the pipeline? We've got, you know, an energy crisis on our hands. We've got the ever increasing cost of living. We've got the national insurance rise in April. So this year it's going to get particularly tough for people. So financial well-being, I think, should be, you know, a top priority. So, you know, what do we mean by financial well? What are the sort of initiatives that employers can think about introducing? It's making sure that you're paying fair and competitive wage. So perhaps consider signing up to the national living wage rather than the national minimum wage. Reviewing your current benefit offerings, obviously in line with business affordability, but just making sure that you're being fair and competitive with the benefits that you're offering. But also consider offering some financial education and awareness to your employees. Now, there are some free services that you can access via the government's Money and Pension Service, but also consider introducing things like debt counselling services, particularly where we know this year is going in terms of, you know, cost of living crisis. Pension education as well, so saving for retirement and retirement planning is really important, and I think particularly for the younger generations in the workplace is often forgotten or overlooked. And also, you know, independent financial advice around savings and investments. You know, you can get specialists in to help support and educate your staff on that. Social well-being. So what do we mean by social well-being? Well, we are social creatures. You know, naturally, we like to connect, we like to communicate with people. And I think this has been quite significantly impacted over the last 2 years with the pandemic. You know, we've had to switch to remote working predominantly. As we start to come out of the pandemic, a lot of employees are now considering hybrid working. So that's kind of part office, part home working. So there's still that element of remote working. So I think, you know, when you're considering social well-being, it's just kind of looking at your communication with your teams, making sure that people have the opportunity to come together and collaborate as much as possible. I think that's really important for the younger generations as well. And I'll come on to that in a bit more detail later. But it's just having that, that dialogue, that continuous dialogue with your people. You know, it makes such a difference to, you know, working relationships. Occupational is all about the job, really. excuse me. So, that is about the working environment, making sure that your workplaces are really well designed, they're open and inclusive, that you've got good line management in place. Have you got skilled line managers that, who are well trained? Looking at the work demands as well. So looking at a person's job, their workload, making sure that they are not stretched to the max, making sure that there's good job satisfaction and work-life balance and autonomy in their role as well. That can have a significant impact on well-being. Purpose and intellectual, I've actually grouped together. And in terms of well-being, this means, making sure that people have meaningful and rewarding work, that they feel that they're actually making a difference and they're providing a really positive contribution to their business. It's people wanting to feel valued, motivated and engaged. And I think the intellectual piece to that is making sure that there's good growth and development opportunities for them. So you've got some clear pathways, career pathways mapped out for them, that there's a continuous learning culture in your organisation, and that you're being really open and collaborative in your culture. And then last but not least, we've got environmental. So environmental well-being is about your sort of physical working environment. So making sure that it's comfortable for people, they enjoy attending your workplace, you're inclusive. But it's also about your company values and your ethical standards, and making sure that you're, you have good respect and dignity at work. Also thinking about corporate social responsibility. So, not just looking at your business, but what you could be doing sort of socially in your communities. It might be that you want to look at partnering with a charity, or introducing some opportunities for employees to volunteer for a good cause. Those sorts of things can have a real significant positive impact on well-being. So I hope that's just given you a bit of a flavour and just a bit of an insight into, it's not just about people's physical or emotional or mental well-being. There are some extended factors that should be taken into consideration as well when you're thinking about well-being in your workplace. So we're looking at well-being across the generations. I think it's fair to say that we're working in a world now where we've got up to sort of 5 generations in the workplace at any one time, and people at different stages of their life. When you're thinking about well-being, they have different priorities. So I think and Claire will come on to say more about this, I think it's wrong to say that there's a one-size-fits-all approach when it comes to well-being. I think it's important that you look at the demographic of your people and really get a good understanding of what it is that they're looking for when it comes to well-being in the workplace. So what might be a priority for one person may not be the same for another person. So, in this session, we don't want to particularly stereotype the different generations. We've all heard about Generation X, Y, and Z, and the sort of stereotypical differences. But what we have done is we've broken it down into 3 sort of generational categories. So we're looking at younger people, so those just starting out in their careers, with sort of up to less than sort of 10 years of working experience. Then we're looking at those in the sort of 30s to 40s age bracket, and then in the 50 plus bracket. So when we're looking at workplace wellbeing for the younger generation, and thinking about what's really important to them, we know that value and purpose in their role is really significant. It's really important to them. So this is all about wanting to have meaningful work, work where they feel that they're making a real difference or positive contribution to your business. So that's about having well-designed roles which give enough depth and breadth and variety to support their learning, and also to give them some really great rounded experience and working experience. Environmental is really important to the younger generation as well. So, they're really interested in your company mission and values, and making sure that there's alignment there between their own personal ethics and values and those of the company. CSR, so social responsibility, is also a really important factor for the younger generation. So really wanting to make a positive contribution to wider society. So could be through charity partnerships or volunteering. Social is really important. As I said before, we're all social beings, but particularly so for the younger generations. And the impact of the pandemic for young people coming in or entering the workforce for the first time has been quite different for them, quite significant. They've had to learn from behind a screen, and there's so much value in coming together and collaborating with colleagues in the workplace. There's so much learning and development that comes from that, just from observing and interacting with colleagues, and that has been stifled the last couple of years. So that's an important consideration. Believe it or not, they're also really interested in having work-life balance. So sometimes when we think about work-life balance, I think we often think about people that have, families, young families, but actually we know from research that while social connectivity is important, so is the ability to have autonomy and flexibility over their working lives. Hybrid working is really helping to shape and facilitate this movement. So if you haven't considered implementing a hybrid working approach in your organisation, then that's certainly something to think about. Personal development, I think this is probably quite obvious and probably doesn't need a lot of introduction, but learning and development, the ability to really develop themselves is absolutely important to the younger generation. And financial education as well. I think that younger people are less inclined to think about saving for retirement, so pensions. You get an awful lot of the younger generation opting out of the auto-enrolment pension scheme because actually cash in pocket is more important to them at that stage in their life. They might be saving for a house deposit, but we know that the earlier people start saving into pensions, the better. So financial education, particularly around pensions, is really important. So I'm going to hand over to my colleague Claire now, who's going to talk you through the next set of generation in the workplace. Over to you, Claire.
Thanks, Rachel. Strange as I get the older generation, I'm taking that slightly personally, but there you go. So Rachel's talked a lot about the overarching themes of well-being, and as she said, we've looked at it in across generations and put people slightly into different categories, but let's not pigeonhole people. But as we move into our sort of 30s and 40s, we do know that our priorities change, and so the factors that affect our well-being may change along with those, and some become more significant than perhaps they were when we first started out on our career. So often the priorities shift towards family. People may be starting a family. They want the flexibility to be able to look after the family, maybe attend school events and those sorts of things. And the sort of benefits that come, if their employer's offering health benefits, what does that package look like? So it's quite a lot about that personal security and the overall offer, the overall benefits package that is important to people in their 30s and 40s, not excluding other people, of course. Financial health becomes, again, important. It might well be that people are just buying their first house, or they are, looking to expand their family, or expand, maybe move to a larger house and so on, if that's what they wish to do. And so job security becomes important. Is their position secure? Is there a pathway for their career? They're sort of that midpoint of their working life. And, so some people might be happy to stay where they are as long as they know the security of the job is there. But at the same time, they're also perhaps wanting to progress. Not everybody wants to, but if people do want to progress, is their employer offering them those learning and development and career opportunities? So as we move into our 50s and beyond, I think things have changed a lot, just by the fact that, or by virtue of the fact that our working lives have extended. So again, family is still important, and we still want that flexibility, but the dynamics within our own families might well have changed a little bit. We might well be looking at, we might well also be thinking about caring for others. Are we able to do that? Our own health might be changing, as we age. Things like menopause for women can have a huge impact on how we're managing our well-being, and it's just something that employers are beginning to think a lot more about and be a lot more open about. So it's about having those conversations. The financial aspect is as important as it is across all the other different ages. But again, the shift might have taken place here. Is somebody thinking, I want to actually retire? Am I able to? So if I'm not able to, is my pension pot big enough to allow me to take retirement when I thought I was going to? Or actually, do I need to work longer, which is definitely happening to a lot of people? So then the job security aspect becomes really important again. Is my job secure enough that I might live out the rest of my working life here? From an employer's point of view, actually, there's an advantage if somebody does want to stay with the organisation, because they have all that experience and that knowledge. So it's in the employer's interest actually to look after those people who do want to stay with the organisation. But if a job isn't secure, there's lots of tensions here for people in their 50s and beyond. They know they've got to continue working, but now how do they change career? How do they sort of position themselves for the market again? Something they might have done, say, 10 years ago, to reinvent themselves, or just to have the confidence to go forward. So there's a lot of help that all employers can give to help to build that confidence for those people. So what can impact those priorities? Well, lots of things can affect those priorities that we just talked about. So, there might well be family illness, people looking after aging parents. They might face bereavement, which can impact on their personal well-being. They might have those caring responsibilities. Sadly, it's very common that people might be going through separation or divorce, and that adds huge financial pressure, emotional pressure, and can really impact on their well-being. And external factors, we're in a dreadful situation at the moment where we're looking at the war in Ukraine, and the sort of, besides all the human factors and the angst that comes with that, it's also looking at the economic impact, economic uncertainty, with prices of fuel going up and all of those sorts of things. So lots of things can affect people's well-being throughout their career and their working life. And it affects them on both the personal level. So just those sleepless nights, that worrying about money, that worrying about the future, just that sheer exhaustion can result from those sorts of pressures. And that, as Rachel talked about earlier, has a huge impact on mental and physical health, and also can lead to that financial distress. So on a personal level, all of those impacts can be seen here. And from the business perspective, if people are worried, or they're not feeling well, they're exhausted and so on, they might well take time off work, and that can lead to an increase in absence rates. It can also impact retention, as people become dissatisfied, or they feel a pressure to earn more money or to have some more flexibility. They might choose to leave, or they might just almost give up. So there's lots of issues about retention around that. And also there's an interesting piece about presenteeism. I think it was in people management, whereby people are continuing to work because they have to, but actually all of these other pressures have such an impact on them that although they are present within the company, they are not really performing to their best. And I think employers just need to be really vigilant and really aware, and keep an eye on people. So how do we support wellbeing? As Rachel mentioned, one size does not fit all, and it's certainly not a tick box exercise. You know, if employers sort of say, oh yes, we offer a good wellbeing support in our organisation, but they don't actually practice it, it will really lead to problems for their employees and from the business as a whole. And it's not just about money, it really isn't. You know, it's about supporting people in ways that really help them, depending on what the drivers are that affect their particular well-being. And so we need to consult. We need to consider what people say, what feedback we get from our employees across the generations. Really listen to what people are saying, really understand what it is that impacts their well-being, and then revisit. So just sort of listening once, developing a wellbeing strategy, and then saying, okay, that's it, we're done, won't work. We need to revisit, review, reposition. And so what should employers do? I mean, Rachel's talked about some things already. It's really important to have an authentic culture of wellbeing and take a holistic approach to well-being. So it's looking across the piece. It's not just about the financial sort of package that people are offered. It's about supporting them through finance education. So it's helping them to have those conversations if they are worried about finance or mental health. It's about enabling them to not be frightened to have that conversation with you. So it's about creating conditions for people to thrive. You know, hybrid working, are we offering a flexible working day? Think about the hours and the tasks and the workload, and where people are working. So if a social aspect to work is important to people and we're trying to manage it through that hybrid working model, what can we do as employers to make sure that we are not losing touch with people who really value that social piece? Things like, I mean, quite a simple thing really is if there are timesheets that in some companies there are, you know, just look at the hours that people are working. If somebody's consistently working beyond their contracted hours, it's time to have to ask the question, you know, why is that? Is it because the role is wrong? Is it because there's too much pressure on them? Are we asking them to do too much? Or is it something that actually they are working less effectively due to other factors, and can we help them in a different way? Leadership is critical. Any sort of culture of wellbeing must be led from the top. Managers and leaders need to walk the wellbeing path. It's no good just talking about it. And I think giving support to managers is really important, because particularly now where things have changed so much over the last couple of years and people's anxiety levels have increased for lots of different reasons. You know, managers, we're asking a lot of our managers to be able to support their team effectively. And so we need to be able to give them some training and give them some support too, to be the best manager that they can be. And the thinking is that it's really important to connect your sort of equality, diversity and inclusion goals with your well-being, so that you're offering a consistent approach to well-being across the board, across all the people that work with you, irrespective of, you know, the role they are, irrespective of their location, irrespective of age, gender, and so on. So it's really about connecting both of those goals to ensure a consistent approach. And then I've put a list here. It's certainly not exhaustive, but think about some of the policies that you have. So as I mentioned earlier, menopause policies have become really sort of to the fore over the last couple of years. And things like bereavement, as we mentioned, an aging workforce, people often looking after aging relatives or people who've died, and it's how do people deal with that, and what do you offer as an employer through support? And that can lead on to some counselling offers and also occupational health. But there are many, many more things that we can offer. Something that we'd really recommend that you do, and this is just, it's a free service and you get your own personal report, so there's no pressure on you to you're not sort of signing up to anything as such, but we have a diagnostic tool that you can just click on the link. It takes about 5 to 10 minutes to complete, and it just gives you a quick health check on your wellbeing policies and other policies. You know, how do you have things in place to meet those needs? And if you don't, what does that exposure to risk look like for you? And then you receive a diagnostic report by return that has a sort of red, amber, green rating and some recommendations. So it just sort of says, actually, that looks as if you're in really good shape. Here you might want to just look at, perhaps there are issues relating to employment law or just general recommendations. So that's something that is worth definitely having a look at. And then for some people, some organisations, if you want some extra support on anything people related, and you want it on an ongoing basis, so you don't have a full-time HR person, or you have a specific project that you want to work on with us, then you can just choose the level of support you need through a retainer service, and that can change as and when your needs change.